The Mafia boss walked into the execution his family had meticulously arranged, or fired the shot that would expose everything and make her the most hunted woman in America. Her finger hovered over the trigger. Malcolm Miller stepped out of the car, flanked by men who'd vowed to protect him. Men who were about to kill him. And Raina Olsen did the one thing an outsider should never do. She destroyed the plan. Hey family, before we dive into this story, I need you to do something. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to choose between doing the right thing and staying safe? Your engagement keeps these stories alive. Hit subscribe, because what unfolds next will completely shift how you see loyalty, power, and survival. And Happy New Year to every single one of you. Let's start this year with a story where saving someone's life becomes the most dangerous mistake you can make. The night exploded. Gunfire fractured the silence like breaking glass. Shouts cut through the darkness as bodies dropped, security detail who weren't supposed to die yet, but had to. Men trained to kill without hesitation suddenly scrambled, confused, unsure who to target. The convoy route collapsed into chaos. Malcolm Miller, untouchable moments before, stood frozen in the center of calculated destruction. Raina moved through the smoke like a ghost, fast, precise, invisible. She wasn't there to save him out of love or loyalty. She was there because his death would ignite a war that would consume her too. As the last guard fell, she pressed something into Malcolm's bloodied hand. A phone. Evidence. Recordings. Her voice cut through the ringing in his ears, low and urgent, trembling despite every effort to stay controlled. Your family ordered this. Don't trust anyone who pretends to look for who's responsible. They already know. Hands grabbed her immediately. Malcolm's surviving security yanked her backward so violently she nearly lost her footing. Someone shouted her name, a name they shouldn't have known. Someone else cursed, weapon raised, ready for blood. Who the hell is she? Grant Holloway, head of security, barked as he stumbled forward, bruised and furious. She just killed half our detail. She saved him, another voice countered, breathless with shock. Raina didn't struggle. Her ice-blue eyes stayed locked on Malcolm's face, searching for something, anything, that told her she hadn't just thrown her life away for nothing. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her ribs, but she didn't look away. For a moment, Malcolm's expression was unreadable. His steel-gray eyes assessed her like a threat he couldn't categorize. Then his fingers closed around the phone she'd given him. It was a small movement, barely noticeable in the chaos, but it changed everything. Let her go. His voice was calm. Controlled. Deadly. The security detail froze. Sir, Grant protested, disbelief flashing across his scarred face. She just... I said, Malcolm repeated, his tone dropping to something colder, let her go. They released her instantly. A ripple of confusion passed through the survivors. Malcolm didn't look at them. His eyes never left Raina's. You have 10 seconds to disappear, he said quietly. After that, I hunt you like everyone else. Raina's breath caught. She nodded once, sharp, understanding, and vanished into the shadows before anyone could stop her. Malcolm stood alone in the wreckage of his convoy, surrounded by dead men who were supposed to protect him, holding evidence of a betrayal he wasn't ready to believe. His phone buzzed. Victor's name lit up the screen. Then Evelyn's. Then Daniel's. All of them called. All of them are concerned. All of them are lying. He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed play on the recording Raina had left him. And heard his uncle's voice sentence him to death. By morning, the underworld wasn't whispering about an assassination attempt. It was whispering about her. The woman who interfered. The woman who had no right to survive what she'd done. The woman Malcolm Miller publicly declared the most wanted person in his empire. To his family, it looked like control. Like a boss reasserting dominance after humiliation. But when Malcolm spoke her name, something flickered behind his eyes that his inner circle had never seen before. Doubt. Because the woman he was hunting had saved his life by destroying everything he thought he knew about loyalty. Malcolm Miller stood in the ruins of what should have been a routine drive home. Dawn light crept over the abandoned industrial district where his convoy had been rerouted, painting the bloodstains in shades of rust and copper. 6 bodies. All men he'd known by name. Men whose families he'd supported. Men who'd sworn oaths in rooms where such things still mattered. Grant moved through the wreckage with mechanical efficiency, photographing bullet trajectories, logging weapons, searching for answers in the debris. His jaw was set tight, anger barely contained beneath his professional exterior. He wanted vengeance. He wanted a target. Malcolm wanted something much more dangerous. He wanted the truth. The recording played in his head on loop, even though he'd only listened once. Victor's voice. Evelyn's confirmation. Daniel's legal assurances that the inheritance clauses were airtight. They'd planned this the way his family planned everything, with precision, patience, and the absolute certainty that blood protected them from suspicion. Who authorized the route change? Malcolm asked quietly. Grant looked up from a shell casing, his scarred face twisting with something close to guilt. Victor's office, sir. Standard security protocol. We've used that route before. Who selected the lead vehicle team? Grant hesitated. That was Evelyn's recommendation. She said you wanted men with families. Men with stakes in stability. Malcolm's steel-gray eyes tracked the blood trail where Raina had dragged one of his guards out of the kill zone before finishing him herself. Efficient. Ruthless. Necessary. She'd known exactly which men were compromised and which were simply following orders into an execution. Every decision had come through family channels. Every weak point had been created by people he trusted without question. His phone buzzed. Victor again. The 5th call in 2 hours. Malcolm stared at the name on the screen, remembering Sunday dinners, business lessons, the careful way his uncle had shaped him into the kind of leader who valued tradition over instinct. Who believed that blood was the only currency that couldn't be counterfeited. Answer it, Grant said. They'll expect you to. Malcolm let it ring out. Another message appeared. This one from Evelyn. Emergency meeting. Family only. We need to discuss security failures and next steps. Security failures. As if the failure was in the execution rather than the plan itself. Malcolm walked to the center of the ambush site, where his car had been boxed in, where the kill shots should have come from 3 directions simultaneously. Raina had collapsed that geometry in under 90 seconds. She'd known the plan better than the men trying to execute it. Which meant she'd been watching his family for a long time. Grant approached cautiously. Sir, about the woman. Raina Olsen. We've got nothing on her. No criminal record, no known associations, no residence we can track. It's like she doesn't exist. She exists, Malcolm said. And she knew my family was going to kill me before I did. The words tasted like poison. Grant shifted uncomfortably. What do you want me to tell them? Victor. Evelyn. They're asking for updates. They want to help coordinate the search. Malcolm turned, his expression unreadable but his voice carrying an edge that made even Grant take a step back. Tell them we're making progress. Tell them she'll be found within 72 hours. Tell them exactly what they expect to hear. And then what? Then, Malcolm said quietly, we see who's actually looking for her and who's just pretending to care. He walked away from the crime scene, leaving Grant to manage the cleanup. His empire had always felt like a fortress, walls built from loyalty and tradition and the unbreakable bond of shared blood. Now he understood the truth. The walls hadn't been breached. They'd been designed with the doors already open. Raina Olsen pressed her back against the cold brick wall of a Baltimore alley, 300 miles from where she destroyed Malcolm Miller's execution. Her hands were steady now, no longer shaking the way they had when she'd pressed that phone into his bloodied palm. Adrenaline had a shelf life. Survival required something colder. She checked her burner phone. No messages. Good. The silence meant her emergency contacts were still breathing, still hidden, still smart enough not to reach out. In her world, communication was a noose you tied yourself to. Her ice blue eyes scanned the street beyond the alley mouth. Morning foot traffic. Coffee shops opening. People moving through their lives with the beautiful ignorance of those who'd never had a price on their head. She envied them for exactly 3 seconds, then the feeling passed. Envy was a luxury she'd stopped affording years ago. A black sedan rolled past slowly, windows tinted, pace deliberate. Raina didn't move. Didn't breathe. The car continued down the block and disappeared around a corner. Miller's people, probably. Or worse, Victor's people pretending to be Miller's people. She'd been tracking the Miller family for 18 months. Not out of obsession or vendetta, but because her survival had always depended on knowing which way the blood would flow before the cut was made. She'd learned their rhythms, their hierarchies, their succession plans. She'd identified the fractures long before Malcolm had even suspected they existed. When she'd intercepted the communications about Malcolm's execution, her first instinct had been to disappear. Let the Mafia kings kill each other. Let the empire collapse into the power vacuum. Stay invisible. Stay breathing. But she'd made the calculations. Malcolm's death wouldn't create a clean transition. Victor was too ambitious and too sloppy. Evelyn was too cold and too isolated. The resulting war wouldn't be contained to boardrooms and back channels. It would spill into the streets, into territories where people like Raina lived in the margins, trying to survive the violence they had no stake in. His death would have drowned her too. So she'd made a choice. The kind of choice that kept you alive today and hunted tomorrow. Raina moved deeper into the alley, toward a basement entrance she'd scouted 2 days prior. The lock was simple. 30 seconds and she was inside, descending into darkness that smelled of mildew and old concrete. She found the corner she'd prepared, a space behind rusted filing cabinets where she'd stashed supplies. Water. Protein bars. A first aid kit. Cash. A second burner phone, still wrapped in plastic. And a laptop. She powered it on, waiting for the encrypted connection to establish. When it did, she accessed a hidden server, one of 6 she maintained across the eastern seaboard. Files appeared. Photographs. Financial records. Meeting transcripts she'd compiled from months of patient surveillance. Everything Malcolm would need to understand what his family had become. Everything she'd saved in case she needed leverage to stay alive. The laptop screen illuminated her face in the darkness, casting shadows under her eyes that exhaustion had already carved deeper. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. Someone who'd learned that rest was just another way to die unprepared. Raina pulled up a news feed. The ambush was already being reported. Mafia boss survives assassination attempt. Authorities are investigating. No suspects named publicly. But the underworld had faster networks than law enforcement. Her name would already be circulating. Her description. The bounty. Malcolm Miller had called her the most wanted woman in his empire. He had no idea how right he was. Or how little choice she'd had in becoming her. Raina closed the laptop and sat in the darkness, listening to the city breathe above her. Somewhere out there, Malcolm was hunting her with resources she couldn't match and reach she couldn't escape. And somewhere in his mind, if he'd listened to that recording, doubt was beginning its slow, corrosive work. She just had to survive long enough for that doubt to become certainty. The order went out at noon. Every crew chief from Detroit to New York received the same message, delivered through encrypted channels that had never failed Malcolm Miller before. Find Raina Olsen. Bring her in alive. Anyone who kills her answers to me personally. The bounty was substantial but not obscene. Malcolm wasn't looking for mercenaries. He was looking for results. Within hours, her description circulated through dive bars and luxury hotels, through port authorities and train stations, through every shadow where his influence reached. Ash blonde hair. Ice blue eyes. 5'7". Athletic build. Moves like she knows how to disappear. Publicly, the hunt was about respect. A woman had interfered in Miller family business. She'd killed his guards, disrupted his security, made him look vulnerable in front of an underworld that measured power and perception. She had to be found. She had to be made an example. Privately, Malcolm needed something the bounty couldn't buy. He needed to understand how she'd known. Raina felt the net tighten by evening. She'd moved from Baltimore to Philadelphia, using bus stations and cash transactions, staying away from cameras when possible and assuming every camera caught her when it wasn't. Exhaustion pulled at her bones, but she couldn't afford to stop. Sleep was a luxury for people who weren't being hunted by the most powerful criminal organization on the eastern seaboard. She kept to crowds during the day and abandoned buildings at night. She changed her appearance in public restrooms, cutting her hair shorter, dyeing it darker, and stealing a pair of glasses from a pharmacy. Small changes. Temporary camouflage. She wasn't trying to become invisible. That was impossible now. She was trying to buy hours. In a Newark motel that rented by the hour and didn't ask questions, Raina finally allowed herself to sit. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped a protein bar. Not from fear. From the simple biology of a body running on adrenaline and 45 minutes of sleep in the past 3 days. Her burner phone buzzed. A text from Lena, her only remaining contact, the only person she trusted with even fragments of the truth. They're in Boston. They're in Philly. Where are you? Raina didn't respond. Telling Lena her location would only make Lena a target. The Miller family didn't believe in coincidences. They'd trace every connection until they found leverage. She deleted the message and destroyed the SIM card. Another phone. Another number Lena would have to memorize. Through the thin motel walls, she heard a television playing the news. Local anchor discussing gang violence. Federal investigation into organized crime. The usual background noise of a city that had learned to live with wolves in expensive suits. Then a name that made her freeze. Malcolm Miller, recovering from what sources describe as a coordinated assassination attempt, has issued a substantial reward for information leading to the apprehension of a person of interest in the case. Raina closed her eyes. Person of interest. They weren't calling her a suspect yet. That meant Malcolm was being careful. Controlling the narrative. Making sure law enforcement stayed in their lane while he conducted his own investigation. Smart. She'd expected nothing less. Her phone buzzed again. Different numbers. Unknown sender. The message was brief. The Detroit crew spotted someone matching your description. They're mobilizing. You have maybe 2 hours. Raina stared at the message. It could be a trap. Could be someone trying to flush her into the open. But the alternative was staying put and hoping the motel's indifference to guest identities would protect her. Hope wasn't a strategy. She grabbed her bag, left cash on the nightstand, and walked out into the cold November night. The streets were wet from earlier rain, reflecting neon signs and headlights in fractured patterns. Every car could be a threat. Every pedestrian could be working for Malcolm. She pulled her jacket tighter and headed toward the train station. 2 hours meant she could make it to New York. New York meant 8 million people to disappear into. It also meant walking directly into the heart of Malcolm Miller's empire. But Raina had learned something in her years of surviving at the edges of powerful men's wars. Sometimes the most dangerous place was the only place they wouldn't think to look. The family meeting took place in the same room where Malcolm's father had once settled disputes with words instead of bullets. Oak-paneled walls. Leather chairs arranged in a semicircle. Bourbon that cost more than most people earned in a month. Everything designed to project tradition, stability, the illusion that blood was thicker than ambition. Victor arrived first, moving with the careful slowness of a man who'd learned to make every gesture appear harmless. His cane tapped against hardwood as he crossed to Malcolm, pulling him into an embrace that lasted just a moment too long. "Thank God you're alive." His voice cracked with practiced emotion. "When I heard what happened, I thought we'd lost you like we lost your father." Malcolm returned the embrace mechanically, his steel-gray eyes tracking the room over his uncle's shoulder. Evelyn entered next, composed and elegant in a charcoal dress, her auburn hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Her hug was briefer, more controlled, her perfume expensive and impersonal. "This is unacceptable," she said, her green eyes flashing with what was supposed to be righteous anger. "Someone tried to kill you and we don't even know who's responsible." Daniel Cross arrived last, the family's legal advisor, looking as pale and nervous as always. He offered a handshake instead of an embrace, his thin fingers cold and damp. "I've already started reviewing security protocols. We'll find the breach." Malcolm sat at the head of the table, the same seat his father had occupied, the same seat he'd inherited along with an empire built on loyalty and blood. Grant stood by the door, silent and watchful, his hand never far from his weapon. "Walk me through it," Malcolm said quietly. "The route. The security detail. Who knew where I'd be?" Victor leaned forward, his expression grave. "Standard protocol. You were coming from the South Side property inspection. We've used that route dozens of times." He paused, shaking his head. "It should have been safe." "Who approved the route change?" Malcolm asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear how it would be presented. Victor blinked, confusion crossing his features too perfectly. "Route change? There was no change. That's always been your primary route from that location." Malcolm's jaw tightened. Grant had confirmed this morning that the route had been altered 72 hours before the ambush. Subtle. Professional. Routed through an industrial area where response times would be slower. "My mistake," Malcolm said evenly. Evelyn's fingers drummed against the table, a nervous gesture Malcolm had never seen from her before. "What about this woman? Raina Olsen. Who is she? How did she know where you'd be?" "That's what we need to find out," Daniel interjected, pushing his glasses up. "I've run background checks. She doesn't exist in any official capacity. No employment history, no property records, nothing." Malcolm watched them carefully. Every expression. Every pause. Every word chosen with just a fraction too much precision. "Could she be working for the Castellanos?" Victor suggested. "Or the Russians? They've been probing our territory for months." The room fell into strategic silence, each person nodding thoughtfully, building a narrative that pointed anywhere except inward. "It's possible," Evelyn agreed. "She obviously had inside information." "Which brings us to the real problem," Victor continued, his tone shifting to something paternal and concerned. "Someone in our organization fed her that information. Someone close enough to know your movements." Malcolm's hands rested flat on the table, steady and controlled, even as his mind catalogued every inconsistency. Victor's convenient memory loss about the route change. Evelyn's too perfect composure for someone whose cousin had nearly been murdered. Daniel's nervousness seemed less like concern and more like guilt. "I want full background checks on everyone in the security detail," Malcolm said. "Everyone who had access to my schedule for the past 6 months." "Of course," Victor agreed immediately. "We'll handle it personally. Family only. Family only." The words hung in the air like smoke. Malcolm stood, signaling the meeting's end. "I appreciate everyone's concern. Let's reconvene in 48 hours. By then, I expect we'll have Raina Olsen in custody and we can get real answers." They filed out one by one, each offering final reassurances, each touch on his shoulder or arm feeling less like comfort and more like they were checking to make sure he was still theirs to control. Grant waited until the room emptied before speaking. "They're lying." Malcolm walked to the window overlooking the city, his reflection transparent against the daylight. "I know. What do you want to do?" Malcolm was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the recording still locked in his desk drawer. Thinking about Raina Olsen running through a city that was turning hostile by the hour. Thinking about the family that had raised him to believe blood was sacred. Keep searching for her, Malcolm said finally. But quietly. I want to know who else is looking. And I want to know who's only pretending to. Raina knew she was cornered the moment she stepped into the Cleveland warehouse. The tip had been too clean. The abandoned building is too convenient. The silence was too perfect. She'd walked in anyway. Sometimes survival meant accepting the trap and trying to control what happened inside it. Malcolm Miller emerged from the shadows at the far end of the warehouse, flanked by Grant and two others she didn't recognize. No guns drawn. No immediate violence. That told her everything. He didn't want her dead. Not yet. He wanted answers. Raina stood in the center of the empty space, her ice blue eyes fixed on Malcolm as he approached. She didn't run. Didn't plead. Didn't adopt the fear he probably expected. She'd spent 3 weeks running. She was done pretending this could end any other way. You're either very brave or very stupid, Malcolm said, his voice carrying across the concrete floor. Neither. Just tired of running from a man who should be thanking me. Grant moved forward instinctively, but Malcolm raised a hand, stopping him. The steel-gray eyes that had measured men's worth for 2 decades now studied Raina with an intensity that would have made most people look away. She held his gaze. You killed 6 of my men, Malcolm said. I killed 6 men who were about to kill you. There's a difference. You interfered in the Miller family business. I stopped a Miller family execution. The words landed like a physical blow. Grant's hand moved toward his weapon. Malcolm didn't blink, but something shifted behind his eyes. Permission to continue. Raina pulled a flash drive from her jacket pocket and held it up. This contains recordings of 3 separate meetings. The first was 11 months ago. Your Uncle Victor and your cousin Evelyn are discussing succession planning. They didn't use your name, but the context was clear. You were becoming a problem. Too independent. Too willing to modernize operations in ways that threatened old revenue streams. She took a step forward. Malcolm didn't move. The second meeting was 7 months ago. Daniel Cross walked them through the inheritance clauses in your father's will. Turns out, if you die without heirs, control of the family assets gets distributed through a vote. A vote Victor has been carefully engineering for over a year. He's promised territories to the Chicago crews, promised legitimacy to the legal operations, and promised everyone exactly what they want. What's the third recording? Malcolm asked quietly. Raina's expression didn't change. The third recording is from 4 weeks ago. The night they finalized your execution. Victor, Evelyn, Daniel, and 2 others whose voices I haven't identified yet. They debated methods. The poison was too obvious. A public hit would trigger investigations. They settled on a controlled ambush. Professional. Clean. Something that could be blamed on rival families while Victor stepped in to stabilize operations. She tossed the flash drive toward Malcolm. It skidded across the concrete and stopped near his feet. He didn't pick it up. Didn't look down. Why? He asked. Why save me? What do you want? Raina's laugh was short and bitter. You think I did this for leverage? For money? I saved you because your death was going to start a war that would burn through every neighborhood where people like me try to survive. Victor's too ambitious and too sloppy. Evelyn's too cold. The power vacuum would have collapsed into violence that wouldn't stay contained to your world. It would spill into mine. She crossed her arms, exhaustion evident in every line of her body but defiance still burning in her eyes. I don't want your money. I don't want your protection. I want you to stop hunting me and start hunting the people who actually tried to kill you. But you won't. Because that would mean accepting that blood isn't sacred. That family isn't safe. That everything you've built your entire identity on is a lie. The warehouse fell silent. Even Grant looked uncertain, waiting for Malcolm's response. Malcolm finally bent and picked up the flash drive, turning it over in his fingers. You could have sent this anonymously. Could have disappeared. Why tell me in person? Because, Raina said, her voice dropping to something almost like pity, you wouldn't have believed it unless you heard it from someone willing to die to make you listen. Malcolm studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to Grant. Leave us. Grant hesitated. Sir, she's dangerous. I said leave us. Grant and the others filed out reluctantly, their footsteps echoing until the heavy door clanged shut. Malcolm and Raina stood alone in the vast empty space, hunter and hunted, both caught in a truth neither had wanted. Tell me everything, Malcolm said finally. Every meeting. Every name. Every detail. Raina's shoulders sagged slightly, relief and exhaustion mixing. Then you might want to sit down. This is going to take a while. If you're wondering whether Malcolm will actually turn on his own family or if Raina just signed her death warrant by trusting him, you need to subscribe because what happens next will absolutely shock you. The family tribunal is coming, and it's going to be brutal. And for the first time since the night she'd saved his life, she allowed herself to believe she might survive what came next. Malcolm didn't go back to the penthouse that night. He went to a property his father had kept off the books, a modest brownstone in a neighborhood where Miller business was conducted quietly and nobody asked questions. Grant drove in silence, glancing at the rearview mirror every few minutes as if expecting his boss to speak. Malcolm never did. The flash drive sat in his jacket pocket, a small piece of plastic that weighed like a loaded gun. Inside the brownstone, Malcolm finally allowed himself to stop performing control. He poured bourbon he didn't drink and stood at the window watching traffic move through streets his family had controlled for 3 generations. Everything looked the same. Everything had changed. He'd listened to the recordings in the warehouse while Raina sat 20 feet away, her ice blue eyes never leaving his face, watching him absorb the voices of people who'd taught him how to be a man. How to lead. How to value blood above everything. Victor's voice had been the worst. Not because of what he said, but because of how familiar it sounded. The same tone he'd used when teaching Malcolm to negotiate. To read people. To understand that power was about patience and perception. He's becoming a liability. Too soft on the drug operations. Too willing to legitimize when we profit from staying in the shadows. Malcolm's phone buzzed. Victor again. The texts had been coming every few hours since the warehouse meeting. Just checking in. Family dinner this weekend. Need to discuss expansion into Newark. Each message is a test. Each silence from Malcolm is a growing concern. He didn't respond. Instead, he made other calls. Quiet ones. To crew chiefs he'd be promoted personally. To accountants who owed him their careers. To security personnel who'd served his father before serving him. He asked simple questions. Who'd approved certain transfers? Who'd been present at meetings he hadn't been invited to? Who'd been asking about his health, his plans, his thoughts on succession? The pattern emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in chemical solution. Victor had been building a shadow infrastructure for over a year. Promises made. Loyalties purchased. Votes secured. All beneath the surface of family dinners and strategy sessions, hidden inside the assumption that Malcolm would never question blood. By dawn, Malcolm had made 17 calls and received 12 that mattered. The organization he thought he controlled had fractures running deeper than he'd imagined. Not everyone was compromised. But enough were. Enough that if Victor made his move, it wouldn't be a coup. It would be a transition that half the family would accept as legitimate. Grant appeared in the doorway, 2 coffees in hand. You've been up all night. Malcolm took the coffee without looking at him. I need you to do something. Quietly. Name it. I want Victor's communications monitored. Not officially. Nothing that goes through our usual channels. Use someone outside the family. Someone who doesn't know what they're looking for. Grant's expression tightened. If he finds out you're surveilling him, that's a declaration. He already declared, Malcolm said quietly. I'm just starting to read the terms. What about Evelyn? Daniel. Them too. Everyone who was in those recordings. I want to know who they're talking to. Who they're meeting. Where the money's moving. Grant set his coffee down, suddenly looking older than his years. This is going to get ugly. It was always going to get ugly. I just didn't want to see it. Malcolm walked to a safe built into the wall behind a painting his father had bought in Atlantic City 30 years ago. Inside were documents, cash, 3 passports, and a handgun he'd never fired. He removed a leather folder and opened it on the desk. Property deeds. Business registrations. Account numbers written in his father's handwriting. Instructions for what to do if the family ever turned on itself. His father had known. Had prepared for this exact scenario. Had understood that blood was only as strong as the ambition it tried to contain. Malcolm pulled out his phone and scrolled to a number he hadn't called in 6 months. A federal prosecutor who'd been trying to build a case against the Miller family for 3 years. A man who'd offered Malcolm immunity twice in exchange for cooperation. He'd refused both times. Now he stared at the number, thinking about Raina's words in the warehouse. Everything you've built your entire identity on is a lie. Malcolm put the phone down without calling. He wasn't ready to burn the empire yet. But he was ready to start removing the men who thought they could take it from him. Grant, he said, his voice carrying the cold authority that had built his reputation. Cancel all family meetings for the next 2 weeks. Tell them I'm consolidating security protocols after the attempt on my life. Tell them I trust no one until we find who leaked my location. They'll panic. Good. Panic makes people sloppy. And right now, I need them to make mistakes. Grant nodded slowly, understanding settling into his features. You're going to war with your own family. Malcolm's steel-gray eyes reflected no emotion. No hesitation. I'm going to find out who my family actually is. And then I'm going to decide what that means. Raina stayed in the brownstone for 3 days. Not as a prisoner, though she understood the distinction was mostly semantic. Malcolm had moved her there after the warehouse, citing security concerns that weren't entirely lies. The truth was more complicated. She knew too much to be released. She'd proven too valuable to be eliminated. And Malcolm needed someone who wasn't performing loyalty while sharpening knives behind his back. She'd been given a second-floor bedroom with bars on the windows that had been installed long before she arrived. Grant checked on her every few hours, professional and distant. Malcolm visited once a day, usually late at night, always carrying questions she answered with a directness that seemed to unsettle him. On the 3rd night, he arrived past midnight and found her awake, sitting by the window with files spread across the bed. She'd asked for access to financial records. He'd provided them, curious what she'd find. Your uncle's been moving money offshore for 18 months, she said without preamble. Small amounts. Nothing that would trigger audits. But it adds up to about $40 million. Malcolm stood in the doorway, still wearing the suit from whatever meeting he'd attended earlier. He looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than missed sleep. Where? Cayman accounts under shell corporations. The registration documents have Daniel's signature. She glanced up, her ice blue eyes catching the dim light. They were preparing to run. After you were dead and the dust settled, they'd have disappeared with enough money to live comfortably forever. Malcolm moved into the room and sat in the chair across from her, a careful distance maintained. Not afraid. Just aware that proximity meant something different now. Why are you helping me? Raina set down the papers and looked at him directly. Because you're the only person in this entire situation who isn't pretending. Your family smiles and lies. Your security team follows orders without thinking. But you actually want to know the truth, even when it destroys everything you believed. That makes me weak in their eyes. It makes you dangerous in mine. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with things neither was ready to name. You see me as a mark, Malcolm said. Someone to manipulate. Raina's laugh was quiet and genuine. If I wanted to manipulate you, I'd tell you what you want to hear. I'd play the victim. I'd make you feel like the hero for protecting me. She leaned forward slightly. I'm not doing that. I'm telling you the truth because you're walking toward another execution and you don't even see it coming. Explain. Your uncle isn't going to wait forever. Every day you stall, every meeting you cancel, every question you ask, you're showing him that you know something. And when he realizes you're not going to die quietly, he'll stop being subtle. Malcolm's jaw tightened. I can handle Victor. Can you handle everyone he's bought? Can you handle a family vote that removes you legally? Can you handle waking up one morning and finding out that every crew chief you trust has been promised something better by someone who's known them longer than you have? She stood and walked closer, stopping just outside the invisible boundary they'd both been maintaining. Malcolm didn't move, but his steel-gray eyes tracked her with an intensity that would have made most people step back. You're not a king to me, Raina said quietly. You're a man who was raised to believe blood protects you, and now you're learning that blood is just another weapon people use. If you hesitate, if you try to handle this the way you were taught, you'll be dead within a month. And what would you do? Burn it down before they burn you. Malcolm studied her face, looking for deception and finding only exhaustion and a brutal kind of honesty he wasn't used to. She wasn't trying to seduce him or manipulate him into some romantic fantasy where he saved her and she fell into his arms, grateful and compliant. She was trying to keep him alive because his survival was somehow tied to hers in ways he still didn't fully understand. You don't owe me anything, he said. No. I don't. But we're in this together now whether we like it or not. You need someone who'll tell you the truth. And I need someone powerful enough to make sure Victor doesn't kill me for exposing him. A partnership. A survival pact. Malcolm stood, the distance between them suddenly smaller than it had been. He could see the faint shadows under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands stayed loose and ready despite the calm in her voice. She wasn't performing strength. She was surviving with it. I'm moving against Victor tomorrow, he said. Quietly. Strategically. I'll need evidence compiled. Names. Dates. Everything you have. I'll have it ready by morning. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Why did you really save me that night? The truth. Raina met his eyes one last time before he left. Because I saw a man who was too decent to survive the world he was born into. And I thought that was worth preserving. Even if it costs me everything. Malcolm left without responding, but as he walked down the hallway, he realized something had shifted. The woman in that room wasn't his enemy. Wasn't his asset. She was the only person in his entire empire who saw him as mortal. And somehow, that made her the most dangerous person he'd ever met. The meeting was called for noon on a Sunday, neutral ground in a private room at a restaurant Malcolm's father had used for negotiations that needed to look civilized. Victor suggested it. Evelyn agreed immediately. Daniel confirmed attendance within minutes. All the right pieces moving into position. Malcolm arrived 15 minutes early with Grant and 2 others he'd vetted personally. Raina's compiled evidence was loaded on a tablet he carried like any other business document. Calm. Prepared. Giving nothing away. The room filled slowly. Victor with his practiced warmth and concerned embraces. Evelyn elegant and controlled, her green eyes searching Malcolm's face for cracks. Daniel pale and fidgeting, legal documents already prepared for whatever needed to be formalized. 3 crew chiefs Malcolm had promoted. 2 advisors who'd served his father. Everyone positioned carefully, the way a chessboard looks before the first move reveals intention. Thank you all for coming, Malcolm began, standing at the head of the table. The past few weeks have been difficult. An attempt on my life. A manhunt. Questions about loyalty and security. We're family, Victor said smoothly. Whatever happens, we face it together. That's what your father would have wanted. Malcolm nodded slowly, then placed the tablet on the table. I agree. Which is why I want to share what I've learned. He pressed play. Victor's voice filled the room, crystal clear, discussing Malcolm's death with the casual efficiency of a man ordering supplies. Evelyn's confirmation. Daniel's legal maneuvering. Dates. Details. The inheritance vote. The offshore accounts. Everything Raina had compiled, everything Malcolm had verified independently, laid bare in recordings that couldn't be explained away. The room went rigid. Crew chiefs exchanged glances. Advisors sat frozen. Victor's face drained of color, then flushed red. Evelyn's composure cracked, her hands gripping the table edge. This is, Victor started, his voice shaking, this is fabricated. Someone is trying to turn us against each other. Malcolm pressed another button. Bank records appeared on the mounted screen. $40 million. Transfer dates matching the recordings. Shell corporations registered in Daniel's handwriting. These are also fabricated, Malcolm asked quietly. Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. I can explain. The accounts were for operational security. In case we needed emergency funds. For what emergency? Malcolm's steel-gray eyes locked on his family's legal advisor. My death. The silence was suffocating. One of the crew chiefs, a man named Torres who'd served Malcolm loyally for 8 years, stood slowly. Is this true? Victor's mask finally shattered. He slammed his hand on the table, the warmth completely gone, replaced by naked fury. You don't understand. You were making decisions that would have destroyed everything we built. Going soft on operations. Talking about legitimizing businesses that have kept this family wealthy for generations. You were becoming your father. Weak. Idealistic. A liability we couldn't afford. So you decided to kill me. We decided to save the family, Evelyn said coldly, standing beside her uncle. You don't get to dismantle decades of work because you've developed a conscience. Malcolm's expression didn't change, but something deadly settled into his posture. You used the word family like it means something. Like it protects you. It does protect us, Victor said, desperation creeping into his anger. We're blood, Malcolm. That matters. That has always mattered. You can't, he gestured at the evidence, you can't let some outsider's manipulation destroy what binds us. Raina didn't manipulate anything. She just showed me what you were too arrogant to hide properly. Grant moved almost imperceptibly, positioning himself between Malcolm and Victor. The two crew chiefs loyal to Malcolm did the same. Torres pulled a weapon. So did 3 others. The room divided instantly. Those who'd been bought. Those who hadn't known. Those who'd suspected but said nothing. All of it visible now, loyalties drawn in lines of sight and defensive positions. We can fix this, Daniel pleaded, his voice high and panicked. We can restructure. Find a compromise. There doesn't need to be violence. Malcolm picked up the tablet and walked slowly toward Victor, who'd aged 20 years in 20 minutes. His uncle's hands trembled. The cane he carried for show suddenly looked like the support he actually needed. You taught me everything, Malcolm said quietly. How to lead. How to command respect. How to value blood above everything else. And you did it while planning to put a bullet in my head. Victor's eyes glistened. I raised you when your father died. I protected you. Guided you. Everything I did for this family. No. Malcolm's voice dropped to something colder than the Chicago winter outside. You did it for yourself. And you used the word family to make me believe I was safe. He turned to Grant. Take them into custody. All of them. Victor. Evelyn. Daniel. Anyone whose name appears in those recordings. Victor lunged forward, desperation overriding survival instinct. Malcolm, please. We're family. That has to mean something. You can't just, blood is supposed to, we're your family. Grant intercepted him easily, forcing him back. Torres and the others moved on Evelyn and Daniel, professional and efficient. Blood, Malcolm said, watching his uncle being restrained, is just biology. Family is supposed to be the people who die before they betray you. He walked toward the door, leaving the chaos behind him. You were never my family. You were just people who shared my last name. Before we see what happens to Reina and Malcolm, take a second to subscribe if you appreciated this journey. Comment below and tell me what you thought of Malcolm's choice. Was he right to destroy his family? These are the conversations that make this community special. Now let's finish this story. Reina left Chicago 3 days after the tribunal. No dramatic goodbye. No promises or declarations. Just a new identity, a bank account Malcolm had arranged through channels Victor never knew existed, and an understanding that her survival depended on becoming invisible again. Malcolm drove her to the train station himself. Grant protested. Security protocols demanded otherwise. But Malcolm had stopped following protocols written by men who tried to kill him. They sat in the car for a moment before she got out, the engine running, heat cutting through December cold. Where will you go? Malcolm asked. Reina adjusted the strap of her bag, her ash blonde hair now dark brown, cut shorter, different enough that cameras wouldn't match her to the woman who'd been hunted across 5 states. Does it matter? No. I suppose it doesn't. She reached for the door handle, then paused. Your empire is smaller now. Fractured. Half your crew chiefs are questioning your judgment. The other half are waiting to see if you're strong enough to hold what's left. I know. Good. Don't try to rebuild it the way it was. That version killed your father and almost killed you. Malcolm's steel-gray eyes stayed fixed forward, watching travelers move through the station with luggage and purpose, living lives that didn't require looking over their shoulders. What would you do? Build something that doesn't require you to trust blood over instinct. Promote people who earn it. Cut ties with operations that only exist because that's how it's always been done. She turned to face him fully. And stop pretending mercy is weakness. Your uncle called you soft because you wanted to legitimize. He was wrong. Evolution isn't weakness. It's survival. Malcolm finally looked at her. You saved my life twice. Once from the execution. Once from my own belief that family meant safety. Reina's expression softened slightly, something almost like warmth breaking through the exhaustion. Then we're even. You gave me a chance to disappear when most men in your position would have killed me for knowing too much. She opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Reina. She paused. If you ever need anything. I won't, she said. But thank you for meaning it. She stepped out, closed the door, and walked into the station without looking back. Malcolm watched until she disappeared into the crowd, another face among thousands, invisible and safe in a way she hadn't been since the night she'd fired that first shot. Grant's voice crackled through the radio. Sir, we have the restructuring meeting in an hour. The new crew chiefs are waiting. Malcolm put the car in drive. Tell them I'll be there. And Grant, from now on, background checks on everyone. I don't care if they've been with us for 20 years. Everyone gets vetted. Everyone earns their position. Understood. Malcolm drove back through the city his family had controlled for 3 generations, seeing it differently now. Not as an inheritance or a kingdom. Just territory that required constant work to maintain. No divine right. No protection from blood. Just decisions made daily about who to trust and why. The empire was smaller. Quieter. More careful. but it was his in a way it had never been before. 2 months later, Malcolm received a postcard. No return address. A beach somewhere warm. One sentence written in handwriting he recognized. Still breathing. Hope you are too. He kept it in the same drawer where he'd stored the recording that had destroyed his faith in family. A reminder that survival sometimes meant trusting the person who had no reason to save you except that it was the right thing to do. Raina Olsen was no longer the most wanted woman in his empire. She was the reason he'd learned to build one worth protecting. And somewhere, in a city he'd never know, she was living a life she'd earned by refusing to let a good man die for someone else's ambition. That was enough.